And in week five, I think people are like a little bit worn out, a little bit stressed. A lot of people they're in final projects and whatnot. And it's a little bit of a tough time. So this is normally their student retro time. They get together with
Mm.
their cohort and talk about the week and do some things like that. And I definitely get the impression that a lot of those week five conversations are kind of like, I think of the Marshawn Lynch line, like, I'm just here so I don't get fined. Like, yep, this week was okay. Next week will be another week, and we're moving on. And so we decided to spice it up a little bit. Last minute, we came up with this idea on Wednesday, doing a little guest talk and then doing some breakout conversations. And so we're going to give it a try. And then I reached out. I was like, who would be cool to give a talk, have some interesting things to say, maybe say yes on short notice? So Wednesday afternoon, I messaged Greg and was like, hey, Greg, you want to come talk to some students? And he was like, yes, done. So here we are. Um, that's the background for everybody. Greg, can you, like, what's your kind of, I guess, okay, I can give my little version and then you give your better version of the Greg
Sure.
intro. Um, I think we started crossing paths when you were like an early person at Twilio.
Yeah.
And if folks don't know Twilio, in my eyes, and I'm sure you have a better pitch. Twilio was like among the first companies to really offer good and easy to use integration between phone systems and uh, programming and web applications and so forth. So if you wanted to be able to send texts, or you want to be able to make calls, or you wanted to build like an interactive voice response or whatever, Twilio could do all those things and do it in a way where you as a developer, not knowing very much, could be like boop boop boop, 10 minutes, now I'm sending text from my app. And this was 10 years ago or something. It was pretty hot. I actually joked for a long time that I don't know if it's still true, but if like if someone just wanted to make some money in software and you were like, I don't really care what the work is, like building IVR systems off of a tool like Twilio, I'm pretty sure you could make like 5,000 at this client and then 2 days later go to make 5,000 at this client and this client and this client. Anyway, so Greg's job at Twilio was also something I think of as new at the time. I don't know if it was new in your eyes, this idea of like developer evangelism, developer evangelist. So I guess first, is that kind of ballpark how you would describe uh, Twilio? I've also, it now occurs to me, I've skipped over that. I think we actually first crossed paths when you're doing Table XI and
Oh
doing software
yeah.
consulting there in Chicago.
Yeah.
So you're a Chicago guy,
Yeah.
long time. You're outside the city now.
So we moved. I lived in Chicago for 11 years, and then 9 years ago we moved to New York, and we lived in Brooklyn and we just this summer we just moved outside of Manhattan. So I'm about 20 miles north of Manhattan right now.
All right.
But I love Chicago dearly. We almost moved back. We almost moved back. We were so close. And then I was like, because we went back to Chicago probably 3 years ago. We went back in November for Thanksgiving to see some friends, and it was unseasonably warm. We're like, oh my God, why did we leave? This is great. And then I was like, before we, move back, we need to go visit in February. And we went back in February. We're like, oh yes, that's right. That's why we're not coming back here, and decided to stay in the New York area.
All right. So um, you did, and then so you were doing software consulting with Table XI, working with a bunch of different clients, et cetera. Got into the Twilio work. Like
Yeah.
at the time, was developer evangelist a thing? And like I just didn't know those people, or like how did that come to be?
Yeah, that's a great question. It was new to me for sure. So I worked for this company called Table XI. It was a small web consultancy. I'd been programming kind of most of my life. And at Table XI, I did a mix of things. I think at some point I worked there for 7 years. At some point, I took like 3 months off. My wife and I had saved up like a little bit of money, and we worked on farms in Europe and stuff like that for a couple months. And during that time, when I had like no professional responsibilities, I started a blog, I started writing, I started getting pretty into photography, and I found myself writing code. And I was like, oh, this is interesting. When I don't have a boss, the things I gravitate to for fun are like coding, writing, and telling stories. And so when I came back to TableXI, I started writing technical tutorials for our blog, and I started speaking at conferences. And in particular, I started speaking. I have type 2 bipolar and ADHD. And I started giving this talk after we had a guy that we worked with pass away from some mental health related stuff. I started giving a talk called Developers and Depression in at Ruby conferences. I think that may have been like you and I may have met at like one of those like Windy City Rails or something at some point. And so I was still writing some code, but I wasn't necessarily like full-time developer. And I was doing this sort of like developer marketing stuff where I was writing technical content. I was speaking at conferences. And out of all the things I did at the small company I was at, that stuff was the most one like interesting to me, but also it felt like the sort of work that I was uniquely equipped at that company to do. And so I was like, oh, this is interesting. What if I could just do this all the time? And through speaking at conferences, I met some other folks who were doing this, and there's a title, and it's called Developer Evangelist. And so that's kind of how I met them. And so I went looking for a job like that and found one at Twilio and ended up spending 9 years at Twilio.
Meanwhile, Twilio, I guess what you did worked, right? Because Twilio, they went from like a kind of medium small company to a medium big company,
Yeah.
made some money.
Yeah. So when I started TableXI, we were 6 people. I was there for 7 years as a consultancy. When I left, we were 35 people. We're like, oh my God, this place is so big. Like it is so much bureaucracy now. 30 people is huge. I started at Twilio. I was number 250. And by the time I left, um, 9 years later, we had topped out at 8,500, and we had gone from being like startup to a publicly traded company. And oh my God, a lot of bureaucracy at that size as well. So yeah, Twilio really their core product and really the I think where Twilio was a really big innovator was Jeff, our CEO, had this belief in developers and the fact like developers are a little bit unique in that they can make purchasing decisions. So often developers could choose what tools, what APIs they're using to solve problems. And so what Twilio did really well in the beginning was basically you just, and now it's kind of common, but for a developer tool for this API, Jeff Lawson, but and so I see your comment, Paul. And the so a developer could go, you could sign up for a free trial, you could send some text messages, you could throw down your credit card, and as your usage would scale up, we would make more money. And so Twilio landed, I think Twilio launched in like '08 or '09. And then I joined 5 years later or so. The As Twilio landed like Airbnb and Uber, and we signed up those customers when they were just a couple employees, and then as they scaled, the usage would scale. And there's this notion of like a B to D, a business to developer sales motion, where if we just serve developers really well, if we just come and like help them on their journey, and sometimes that's going to be, hey, I can help you send text messages. But a lot of our work was really just like we'd go to hackathons and help people build stuff. Like we would write blog posts about things that were difficult that had nothing to do with Twilio. And our notion was if we just serve the community, it will work well, right? And developers will choose to use this when they need to send text messages. And that worked. Like that go-to-market motion worked. And later on in the company's history, then we hired a big sales team and we did like the whole enterprise stuff and all that. But yeah, the whole foundation of Twilio is kind of like origin story is very much let's just serve developers, let them sign up with their credit card, and as they're successful, we'll be successful. You might be muted. Yeah, yeah.
Cool. My system
There you go.
has randomly changed inputs, no particular reason. Um, One of the Twilio connections locally here in the Denver market was like SendGrid was
Yeah.
the kind of like early growing Denver tech companies that wasn't a Boulder company. It wasn't it from anywhere else. And SendGrid was acquired by Twilio, and so has Twilio then has kind of a significant footprint here in the Denver community around that. Okay, so you do the Twilio thing, flying around, evangelizing, hackathons, getting paid some money, and then eventually you're like, I'm done with this.
Sorta. Yeah, sorta.
Why?
So yeah, it was, so I got laid off. I got laid off 2 years ago.
Because
Um,
you're a bad person, Greg,
you're right.
and
Yeah,
everyone
exactly.
hates you.
Yeah, so it was almost exactly 2 years ago, and it was interesting. Um, so how did that work? So yeah, I said earlier we topped out at 8,500. That was before the first round of layoffs. And the first round of layoffs, I survived the first round of layoffs. Um, and I saw like Twilio was super generous with the folks who got laid off, especially the folks who had been there for a long time.
Mm.
And and me and like a couple other folks I knew kind of like just let our managers know, like, hey, like I had started looking for other gigs, but kind of like let our managers know, hey, like if there's another round and you like need people on the list, like I was just like, hey, I wouldn't mind being on the list. Like especially if someone else can keep their job who wants to be here. And so I ended up getting laid off in the second round, and Twilio was super generous. My 9-year anniversary was on a Friday. Um, I got laid off on a Monday, and they gave me like many months of severance. And so this was 2 years ago. I think I got laid off mid-February, the November before, so just 3 months before ChatGPT had just come out. And I had spent that holiday break playing with the GPT-3 API. And like I said, I've been coding most of my life. Playing with that API was the most fun I had had coding in so long. And for many years, for like 5 years at Twilio, I was leading teams, and so I hadn't spent as much time coding, and I felt like I had gotten rusty, and I felt like um, it's like there's some extent to which like the skill you sharpen as a manager in a large publicly traded company is learning how to navigate a dysfunctional bureaucracy. And I don't say that to like throw shade at Twilio, like just all publicly traded companies are dysfunctional bureaucracies, and learning how to like navigate them, like how do you bring on a vendor and get accounting to like pay them, and how do you get budget to do this thing, and how do you spend all this time writing performance reviews for your team and stuff. And it's just like not the stuff I got into the game for. Like I like coding, I like people, I like telling stories with code. And so yeah, I had this opportunity to take some time off, and I was like, I'm just going to do that, and I'm going to basically treat this time in my life as candidly like very similar to like what you all are doing here. I was like, I'm gonna treat this as like a self-directed master's in applied AI. And I'm going to just build stuff, and I'm going to learn, and I'm going to see what all this AI stuff is about. And I've kind of stretched that out past. I originally planned to do that for 6 months. It's kind of been 2 years, and I do some consulting and advising with AI companies on developer relations, or you could say developer evangelism. And then so I'm still not like full-time income necessarily, but I am supplementing that and like just continuing to learn, trying to figure out what I'm going to do next year.
And your partner is like, sure, go fuck around with AI some more, just do some of the consulting things here and there,
Yeah,
buddy.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like,
No, my wife's pretty amazing, and we have 2 kids, and it's look, I working at an early stage startup like Twilio is intense. And it worked out like um you know, I was there pre-IPO, and so like I made some money from the stock stuff. I didn't make like I'm not retired by any means, but I made enough that I could like be intentional about this phase of my life and what comes next. And what's been really awesome is that for like the 9 years I was at Twilio, if you had asked me what is your priority, I would say it was family. But if you were to look at my calendar and like who won in the scheduling conflict, Twilio was my priority. Like I spent so much time on planes. I stayed late at the office so many times. It's funny. There's a story about SendGrid. I'll tell the story real quick. Is because it like is indicative of the type of things we were doing there. So we had this tradition at Twilio. that you could earn a red track jacket if you built your Twilio app. So all employees, when they are hired, they could build an app with Twilio, whether they are a developer or not. And we tried to support the non-developers. They build an app, they demo it in front of the company, and we had this really beautiful ceremony where then you'd get your red track jacket. So if you wore the red track jacket at Twilio, it meant you had actually built and experienced what the customers did. And so we announced that we were acquiring SendGrid, and the deal was going to go through on February 1st. And I think that was like a Tuesday or a Wednesday. And on Friday, they called me and said, "Hey, Samir, the CEO of SendGrid, wants to get his track jacket. Would you help him do that?" And I'm like, "Sure." And they're like, "Great. Can you be in San Francisco on Monday morning?" I'm like, "Sure." And so like 2 days later, I get on a plane, fly on Sunday night, and it was really a like amazing opportunity of a lifetime. That week when they're closing the deal for SendGrid, and Samir's going from like meeting to meeting and meeting, I basically shadowed him with a laptop, and like in the breaks in between his meetings was teaching him how to write Python so that he could build a SendGrid Twilio, to the point where the night before the deal closed, we took a cab together to the San Francisco airport. We took a flight on Southwest together. I sat next to him and on the plane was teaching him some coding stuff, and we flew to Denver. And then he got his app built that morning. And so that when they had the big assembly where they brought everyone together, he could demo his Twilio plus SendGrid app and get his track jacket there. And so I say it was an amazing opportunity, and is like just everything being able to like be that close as things happen. But that's kind of like the pace that we were going at for a long time. And so it's been really awesome these last 2 years to just prioritize family. Our girls are 10 and 4, and just being able to like they actually want to spend time with me, and it's been amazing to spend time with them for these, few years when they still want to.
The most unbelievable part of that story is that you and the CEO are going to close the deal and you fly on Southwest.
Dude,
Yeah, but
like that one of Twilio's values was be frugal. And like I think the saying was because Twilio had these 9 values that were really meaningful, and then like the CEO really believed in them, and it was a really big part of the culture. And the idea was like, hey, the more we can do with less, the more we can do, or something like that. And yeah, I love Southwest. I just saw in the chat, and yeah, I could talk about Southwest for a long time, but since I used to live in Chicago, Southwest was just the best way to get everywhere. Like Midway is a great airport, and they basically had direct flights just about everywhere you wanted to go.
while we've been talking, my partner texted me. The text was, "What world are we living in?" Let's see if I can get this to focus. It says, "Naked passenger removed from Southwest flight."
Oh, funny.
Brandenburg. Small world. All right, let's talk AI.
Yeah,
So you get into this transition phase, you're going to do some programming, generative AI, right? AI has been a conversation for 30 years. Um, Generative AI, specifically like ChatGPT, I think 3 comes out, as you said, about 2 years ago. And all of a sudden, it goes from a like, someday maybe people might interact with computers like this, to now people, a lot of people, or at least like trying some stuff out. And so you jump in, and like, what direction do you head first? Like
yeah,
why are you looking at it as like, I want to, I was talking to somebody last week who's a high school student, and I was like, "Oh, is AI showing up in your learning?" And they're like, "Oh yeah." And I was like, "What kinds of things do you do?" And they're like, "Mostly summaries." And I was like, "What?" And they're
yeah,
like, "Well, the teacher will like give us something to read, and then they'll tell us to ask ChatGPT for a summary, and then compare the summary to like our own thoughts of reading the article." I was like,
yeah.
"Okay." And then what? He's like, "That's it." I was like, "All right, cool." Like, that is, I don't know, maybe the first 5 seconds of using like some kind of generative AI. What direction did you head in terms of
Yeah.
things you wanted to figure out how to do, or figure out if it was possible?
Yeah. So I'd say broadly speaking, there are two. And Actually, I'll even back up and I'll share like an analogy that as I've been doing the AI stuff, and then like I said, we just moved outside the city, and it's the first time that I've ever owned a house. So I've bought like some power tools, and I've never been particularly handy, or I always used to like have to call the landlord, see if I could put a nail in the wall to like hang a picture. And so actually being able to like do stuff has been amazing to me. And a big part of well, I think I have here. So I have this drill, right? And so like a big part of these tools is like, oh my God, like this thing is so powerful. I mean, listen to this. It's like, wow, you can feel the power, right? And um, but I was trying to put a hole into our basement so I could hang up some shelves, and like this would just wouldn't work at all. Like I could not get, and I went to Lowe's and I bought a drill bit, and I'm like trying to put it in, and it just wasn't working. And it turns out like I needed a hammer drill, and I never knew that. Like I never knew that there was like a difference between this. And I'm like, I don't understand. Like this thing's so powerful. Like why is it so useless? That like it's a drill. Like why can't it put a hole in the wall? And I think a lot of for me in the DIY stuff, the challenge has been okay, trying to figure out when is this power tool the right tool for the job? Like what is the shape of job for which this is the right tool? And so like I own a circular saw and a jigsaw is like, okay, well, when do I use the when do I use? I think large language models has been a similar journey for me. So I because these things are absolutely powerful. It's really amazing some of the stuff you can do with them. Also, there are times when you use an LLM and it's like comically inept. And you're like, oh my God, this thing is useless. Like it hallucinates. Like it can't even count the number of R's in strawberry. It can't do math. And so I think a lot of my journey over the last couple years has been let's take this thing which is unquestionably powerful and try it at a bunch of different tasks and try to see if I can figure out some patterns for when is a large language model the right tool for the job. And so broadly speaking, I'd say I've kind of gone down two paths. One is learning to build with large language models. So that'd be like using OpenAI, using Anthropic via the API primarily. The second is as a developer, learning to build with large language models in my IDE. And I know you all are fairly new on your coding journey. This is the best time in history to learn how to code. Like you've never had more assistance. And a big part of like for me, the last couple years has just been trying to figure out as a developer, I started writing code when I was like six. It was like basic on a TRS 80. How do I completely change my workflow to integrate these large language models? It's almost like wearing like an Iron Man suit while you're writing code, right? Like you have this assistance now that we never had before, and learning like when can you trust them, when can you not, what types of like when should you reach for that tool, when should you not, and experimenting with a lot of that stuff has just been like really amazing.
One of the reasons I was excited to talk to you about this stuff is because I knew you come at it from this angle of like, it's not like a Terminator murder bot that's
Yeah,
coming to like kill everyone. Instead, it's putting on your own Iron Man suit. Um, what do you see as like I was thinking about in the last couple of days for myself, like I understand how LLMs and generative AI like work from a hypothetical standpoint. I have used tools to do things, and I looked at a little survey that was just saying like I think it was on LinkedIn. Somebody was doing a poll around like how many hours a week are you interacting with an LLM system, and mine
yeah,
was like less than one, like an
okay,
occasional task here and there, or it's like something will come up to your point of like, oh, I'll see a shape of a problem that's like, oh, take this text and pull out all the URLs and dump them out for
yeah,
me, like
yeah,
trivial little things. That's when I'm reaching for it. But I think people like you are like in it a lot of the time,
yeah.
in 10, 10, 20, 30 hours a week, you know and it just makes me wonder like what are some I guess like a quick allegory is like I laugh about SF Eric, I forget what Eric's last name was, but he's like a Ruby guy. He gave a talk at RubyConf in like 2012 or something about Bitcoin.
Okay.
And it was like a talk about how Bitcoin works and like it could be interesting and all this stuff. And if you came to the session, he would, and I went to the session, if you came to the session, he would give you a Bitcoin,
Like one whole
a
Bitcoin?
whole Bitcoin. Yeah.
Oh my God.
And it was
Wow.
like, I don't even, like, I get it, but I was like, I don't need, Eric's busy talking to people. I need to get my Bitcoin, you
Wow.
know?
Wow.
Now you look back and you're kind of like, well, maybe I should
Yeah.
have grabbed that
You're
Bitcoin.
like that would have been a good hour.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and I kind of wonder about with AI, like, do we repeat the same patterns
Yeah.
where as technical people, we're kind of like, oh yeah, 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 like I get it, I know what it's for. Maybe it's kind of interesting. And 10 years from now, we'll be like, oh shit, should
Yeah.
have done X, Y, and Z. What are like some of the misconceptions that you see like technical people
Yeah.
have about either AI systems, how AI could and should be used, etc.
Yeah. So I'll preface to say like I still remain personally like a crypto skeptic. Like I have never owned Bitcoin. Like I didn't get into that. And I today I'm doing I do a lot of education around um AI stuff. And and I think one of the challenges is there are a lot of folks who are like, hey, here's how you get rich quick with AI. Like I think there's a lot of like kind of grifters, right? And I'm not saying that all crypto is that, but there is a lot of grifting and scams in crypto. And then a lot of those folks saw the next AI wave popping up and they moved over there, or folks adopted. And so I generally what I would say is the folks who say, AI is going to take over the world or AI is going to put all the developers out of work have not used the tools, right? Like they're just not
Hmm.
that good yet. The people who say, "Oh, this is just the next crypto hype wave," um, it's all hype. Also, haven't used the tools. Like there's genuine utility here, and so I think the best way to kind of learn what's real and what's not is to use the tools. Actually, could I share my screen and do a quick demo for you
Oh
all?
yeah, pull up
Um,
screen share.
I
There
just
we go.
requested it. We'll see.
Yeah, I think it should come through.
What is y'all's like text editor of choice or IDE of choice?
VS Code.
VS Code? Okay, awesome. And have y'all played with Cursor at all yet?
I have not personally.
Okay, cool. So this is Cursor. This is the most popular AI first code editor today. I'll just let me share a little bit about my journey of because I think this is probably the bits of the talk to be most relevant to you folks learning code today. Because I think you can kind of skip over some stuff. Oh, there's a whole bunch of talk tracks we could go here because you do risk if you lean too heavy on this stuff, you risk not learning some of the fundamentals and whatnot. But like I'll show you kind of the demo and we can talk about best practices. So the way I started learning how to code with AI over the last couple of years is I would just go to ChatGPT, I'd ask it a coding question, I'd copy and paste the answer into my IDE. And this was different than how I had coded basically most of my life, which was go to Stack Overflow, like you'd Google the question and you'd go search through some blog posts, you copy and paste the code, you bring that in. So we basically replaced the internet, like Stack Overflow and Google, with ChatGPT, where it could answer your specific questions, give you code, you copy paste them. Cursor came out. Cursor is a VS Code fork, so this stuff should look pretty familiar. The first thing they did is that they just integrated the chat directly into the IDE. So they have this panel over here. You all can see my screen, right?
Yep.
Yeah, cool. All right, so they integrated the chat directly into the IDE here. So over here on the right hand side is you can think of it as Chat GPT integrated, although I am personally using Claude 3.5 Sonnet. So this is the model from Anthropic. All right, so that was the first thing they did. Over time, they've added more and more features. And so we'll do something like this. I don't know if y'all are familiar with the game of life. But I'm going to do this is what the kids are calling vibe coding. So I have this program called Super Whisper, which is a dictation program set up. So I'm going to hit this button here. We'll see if write a game of life implementation in Python, use the console for output, and make it green. So This Super Whisper is going to take my dictation, put the instructions here into the chat. I'm going to click send. On the back end here, this is making API requests to Anthropic. Anthropic is going to kick back some code to me, and then it should edit my file here. Now, it tried to use NumPy, and so I don't have that. You know what? Got a little thing here. Let's get rid of that. I don't have NumPy installed, so it's telling me that I need to pip install NumPy, but I'm actually going to instead tell it, I don't want it to do NumPy, so I'm going to do this instead. Can you please remove the NumPy dependency and write a new solution that just uses the standard library? And I'm doing Python here. I still do quite a bit of Ruby on Rails as well. And this works just as well with Ruby on Rails or JavaScript, especially as too. And so here I've requested a change to this code base. And so it's going to take my code, it's going to send my code to Anthropic. And now you can see that it's proposing diffs. So it has made changes and it's letting me view all of the changes. And then I have the option to accept all of those diffs right there. So then I will come in and try to save it, although it doesn't seem to, there it goes. I don't know why that's not letting me save there. We'll skip that. Oh, there we go. And so now if I open up a shell here, do this one. Oops. All right, and we see I have hello.py there, and I run hello py. We can see on the first try I run this, I get a game of life animation happening. And so that was 50 lines of code. Let's make this a little bit bigger. Can you please double the size of the board and make the simulation go twice as fast? And we've had dictation for a while, but one of the magic that's happening here on the dictation is that before it writes the dictation in, it's actually running what it, my literal dictation through one of the models to clean it up a little bit, and it knows that I'm in cursor. So here you can see that it's proposed a couple of diffs. So the size used to be 20, is now making the size 40, and the time was sleep 0.1. It's made that time sleep 0.05 to speed it up. So I will try to save this again. And then, although there does seem to be a little bit of a delay on the save, because I think I have an extension that wants to run here when I do this. And then see if that goes. I think that maybe went. We'll see here. Oh, same size. It's not saving for some reason. I'll have to fix that.
There's like a formatter plugin.
Yeah, I have like a linter going that doesn't be there. Yeah, I wonder why that's not going. All right, but there it goes. All right, so we'll run this one more time. And you see that it's now going twice as fast and the board is twice the size. I cannot express how crazy this is to me that this works. Like the very first time I asked GPT-4 to write this code for me, like this is code that I could write this code. It would take me probably 2 to 3 hours. And it absolutely would not run the first time. There absolutely would not run the first time. The fact that I can just ask ChatGPT or Anthropic in this case to write a program in like literal seconds that would take me 3 to 4 hours and it can do a better job than I could is incredible. The fact that I can then ask it to make iterative improvements to that is also incredible. And so this is just like such a different world we're living in as developers than we were 2 years ago. Now, like, does this mean that I don't have a job anymore? Absolutely not. Like, does this, like, all of a sudden, like, all the developers are employed? No. I think what this does is like the developers who learn to embrace these tools are going to be able to do, at minimum, twice as much output as they could do before. And I do think like 10x in some use cases probably makes sense. And I think we're going to increasingly see in the same way that like we have to like do a little bit of work on our house. So we're interviewing general contractors. If I had a general contractor show up to my house and say, "Hey, I'm a bit of a purist. I only use hand tools. I don't believe in power tools," I'd be like, "That's awesome that you have a hobby. We are looking for a professional who can do this work quickly, and we are only going to like hire someone who knows how to use the tools." I think that we increasingly are going to get to a place like, and increasingly, I mean like 12 to 24 months, where if you're a developer and you're just like, "Oh no, I just don't believe in AI, like I just don't, I like to write my stuff by hand," we're gonna be like, "That's great, I'm glad you have a hobby." But developers who don't embrace these tools are going to be left by the wayside, and I think this is an incredible opportunity for you all, because I'm 45 and a lot of my peers are deeply skeptical of these things, and they have I'm not negating, like there's good reasons for skepticism, but they're just like, "Oh, I tried it once and it didn't work, so I'm not going to try it." There is so much opportunity for you all to like be AI first developers, to like come right in, start learning how to use these tools right out of the gate, and like learn how to approach these programming challenges as more of like an orchestrator, as opposed to someone who needs to like be a hand crafting artisan of code.
Yeah, and I think I get like all those different perspectives, right? Of the one where you're like, holy shit, right? Like I've definitely been in code retreats and so forth where we spend an hour, 2 hours writing the same code that you generate in a few minutes. One of the pieces that you mentioned in there that I think people really overlook, and is the thing that I try and highlight to especially non-technical people, that's most interesting to me about AI is revision, right? Where it's like game of life. If you didn't have AI and you didn't want to write the code, you could find hundreds of implementations on GitHub and clone it, right? But it does not help from there. There is no straightforward way for you to say like, make it twice as fast, make it way faster, make it 20 times faster, until you pick through the code and go like, oh, it's this one line that's setting the sleep of how fast it goes, or make it bigger, or do it, oh, instead of Python, do it in Java, instead of Java, do it in Go, etc. And like those, that ability to iterate in code or iterate in prose or whatever system you're working on is what to me makes like interacting with AI systems fundamentally different than everything else you can find on the internet, because
Yeah.
you can tweak it to your needs
Yeah, agreed.
instead of a
Uh,
complex copy and paste. Yeah, go ahead.
no, it's I think a common complaint, and there's a lot of validity here too. The Just as you all explore this, just know the AI demos always look awesome. And then and that's, I think, a common experience folks have with something like Chat GPT is I'll go to Chat GPT and I'll be like, "Write me a poem about whatever, ice cream." And it writes a poem. I'm like, "Oh my God, this is actually a pretty good poem." Well, the funny thing is I'm not actually a poet. And and when an actual poet asks ChatGPT to write a poem, they're like, "This poem kind of sucks." And I find the same thing with like, what if I ask it to write about something that I'm an expert in, then I'm like, this is kind of wrong on like these two really important details, right? Um, and so the AI demos tend to be very impressive, especially if it's an area you're not an expert in. And then when you try to adopt it, you'll typically find that it falls short, or you'll find that it does like the first 80% really well. And then like the last 20%, you end up spending, 3x more time on trying to get the last 20% than if you had just done it the old fashioned way yourself, right? So that's a pretty common complaint. And so what I just showed you all, I don't want to like that was just 60 lines of code. Like you said, there's thousands of implementations or more on the internet. And so it's a pretty common problem it should know how to solve. A big complaint about these tools is that they don't work as well on large code bases or in like enterprise software or legacy systems. That of course it works well from a blank file. Like that's always when it's easiest to write code. The hard part is when you have a big project that's thousands of lines of code or more. That does seem to be getting better though. Claude just really, or Anthropic just released a new tool called Claude Code, and I've been experimenting. I'm actually making a YouTube video about it right now, and it's and it works on large code bases, and it's been really fascinating watching it. And it's been just like you say, so much of code is about iterating, and like I was talking to some folks who specialize in enterprise software development the other day, and they said basically enterprise development or all coding really is just about how do you make the next change. And if it's a blank file, that next change might just be the first 40 lines, but often it's like, how do I change this function right here to do something without breaking everything else? And so the technology and the tooling is coming along and getting better, but that is like a bit of a challenge that you'll often find is getting started feels really fast and easy and magical. And then as your program grows in complexity, it becomes a lot harder.
You talked earlier about how becoming a manager at a big company often means like learning to navigate the bureaucracy, right? And I think becoming a developer at a company of really any scale, it's a lot of the same challenge when you have a large code base or a code base that's been around for a few years. It's often hard. I think it's probably hard to understand as a student. Like it's almost like jumping into, the rainforest and being like, go find this frog. And it's like, it could be fucking anywhere. Like it
Totally.
could be anywhere in here. I have no idea. And so
Yeah.
just like navigating where you should be looking, where you could be working, and then the implications of like, if I change this thing, what else might
Yeah.
happen? There
Yeah.
was something I had never seen before 10 to 12, 14 years ago now, when I was doing some time at Living Social. They had code that they thought wasn't in use, but they weren't sure. And so they would put these markers in the code, like log a message to this file. And then they would ship it and they would run it. They would just let things run normally for a couple months and then go look at those files and see if the code had ever executed
Oh,
and logged
wow.
anything to the file. And it was just kind of like,
Wow.
this is what we got, huh? Like
Yeah.
just it's or I think of the same thing if you ever clean out the drawer in your house that has keys in it and you're
Yeah.
like, pretty sure I don't need this key. I'm gonna put it back anyway
You're gonna
because
put it back,
it's
yeah,
gonna
because the
like
cost
really
of,
hurt.
keeping it is a whole lot less than the cost of throwing away and needing it later on.
Yeah. Loading.
The tools are actually LLMs are really good for those use cases. Actually, I've heard from some folks in larger companies that what they found is the large language models, even if you're not using them to write code, they're incredibly effective in helping new developers onboard onto the code base because the LLM can ingest all the code base and then the developer can ask questions and say, hey, like, what does this function do? Where else is this function being used? And I heard them say that it's actually been taking a lot of the burden off the senior developers who would otherwise be responsible for hand-holding the junior developers as they progress. And so, because now it has this dual effect, right? Like one great part about these large language models is that they have infinite patience and they're non-judgmental, and we know they're non-judgmental. And so you can ask your large language model anything at all. And like, and as you know, I have often felt intimidated. I'm at best a competent developer. Like I've often felt intimidated by the folks who are like much better developers than I am. And so I'd be afraid to like show my ignorance or afraid to ask the same question 2 or 3 times. And these large language models just don't care, right? And so you can come in, you can ask them over and over and over again, and it's both helping the junior developers come up to speed faster, but it's also letting the senior developers spend more time writing code as opposed to having to do the onboarding.
I think you're like 1000% right. It when again, like broadly outside of programming, when I talk with people about like where should AI go, and it's like look at any problem that taxes people's patience, right?
Yes.
Or it's an easy example is like I assume your parents like mine are getting older
Yeah.
as people start to experience things like dementia and Alzheimer's and so forth. We know from science that like people having these thought-provoking conversations, story like retrieving past memories and so forth is significantly beneficial for maintaining the mental health status functionality that they have left. And nobody wants to hear grandpa's same story every day,
Right.
except for the AI does,
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like no senior developer wants to answer the same question for you that they answered 3 days ago,
Right.
but the AI will, and it won't
It
complain,
totally will.
you know.
Yeah.
Now I know
Yeah.
I can feel Megan's like concern. She put something in the chat. She's like, "Don't forget, kids, we still got to learn how to spell." Like as a new developer, you put on your Iron Man suit. You're probably just like leveling buildings and
Yeah.
massacring people.
Yeah. Totally. Totally. Yeah.
How do you like step into these spaces and maintain a degree of like understanding. Or I was
Yeah.
debating with someone, they were calling it like taste. How do you
Yeah.
like build up enough of the understanding at the same time so that you're not just like, well, it's what the AI said, must be
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. I do think there's a big component of, um, so my daughter's 10. She's, she wants to be a writer. She wants to be an author when she grows up. She loves reading. She's got a couple like Google Docs that are 100+ pages, like books that she written, and we're trying to figure out how to edit them and self-publish them and stuff. So she has deep desire to become a better writer, and ChatGPT has actually been a really great companion for her because she'll go to it and she'll say, "Hey, like here's a paragraph. How could I structure this paragraph better?" Or like she'll take like she'll put like underlines in it, like blanks for like a character's name or something, and she'll copy paste to ChatGPT and be like, "Give me 10 character names for potential character names," and she'll choose one. So a lot of the stuff that where she would come to, Rachel or I, Mama or I, and where, again, it's infinitely patient. It's great. By the same token, so like she has motivation to learn, and it's a great tutor for her. If all she wanted to do was generate 100 pages of slop, it would also do that for her, right? And so I think if your motivation is I just want this script to run, it will probably do that for you. If your motivation is I want to understand what this code does and I want to be a better programmer, it's really good at that. And so what I think you could do is look at like open source libraries, like look at sites that do have tutorials, like take classes, and then use ChatGPT or Claude, whatever it is, or and Cursor. So Cursor that I showed, I think there's a free plan. I pay $20 a month and it gets you unlimited access to the APIs. So if you only pay for one AI product, and like if you only have appetite for a single $20 a month subscription, if you're a developer, I would actually recommend just getting Cursor, and then you have that chat already built in where you can chat with the different models, and you can do it directly in Cursor, and your $20 a month will give you access to those. And I would just use it as a tutor. So like I would just go through code, you'd highlight chunks of code, like, hey, what does this do? What would be another way to write this? Or, much like in the writing process, write code yourself and then ask Cursor, be like, how would you refactor this? Like pretend you were a senior developer and I'm a junior developer. Give me a code review on this. And you could just treat it as if it is a like rubber ducking, rubber ducking is like talking about the code out loud. You can treat it like that. You could treat it as if it's a pair programmer for you to help you explain stuff. But you will have to, if your motivation is to learn, it's such a great tutor. But you'll have to fight that urge just to like get the program to run, because it will definitely speed through that process without you learning anything if that's what you want to do.
Gonna send you all to some breakout rooms in about 90 seconds. So this is your warning, your heads
Can,
up.
can I give, I have
Yes,
a quick career thing that I often share with like code
I love
folks,
it.
or code school folks, that I don't know. Well, here I'll kind of share like a little bit my career, and like I think like what abstracts out from as you all think about your path. Like I said, I'm at best a competent developer. I've never been an exceptional developer. I'm a pretty good public speaker. My dad was a pastor, so I grew up watching him do that. But I'm nowhere near as good of a public speaker as like someone who actually does that professionally, like a stand-up comedian or an actor. Like I'm a decent writer, but again, like nowhere close to someone who's publishing for any major publication every day. Where I've made like my career is at the intersection of those things. And so like I never got to a place where I was like 0.1% at any one of those skills. But I got to a place where I was like, top like 20% at a few different things. So the way I'll often describe it is like, I might be like a 50th percentile programmer, and maybe I'm like in the top like 20% of like public speakers or something. But amongst software developers, like if I go to a technical conference and everybody on stage is a software developer, like I'm probably in the top 1% of software developers who give talks, right? And I'm definitely better at coding than 99% of public speakers, right? And I think that there's a lot of opportunity, like if you think about economics and supply and demand, like the way that you can be highly rewarded for whatever it is you do is either to be in like the 0.1% at a single skill and just be better than everybody else at one thing, or you can be unique and provide unique value by being pretty good at two or three things. And I think for folks who go through coding schools and who had a previous career prior to entering code school and had some other experience, I think that that's a really great way to think about it is like you don't need to come out of this experience. Like you probably do need to work for a year or two as a developer where you're just getting paid to write code and you know what it feels like to deploy to production, but you don't have to be great at it. Especially what you can do is you can take your other interests in life. And like I would write tutorials on the Twilio blog, and then I get emails from someone to be like, "Hey, I'm a nurse, and I don't really know much about writing code, but I used your tutorial to build a system that sends text messages to all the other nurses for the schedule to like remind everyone where the shift is, and it's like significantly helped improve like the decrease the absentee rate or whatever." And we hear a lot of those stories. One of my best friends is a magician, and he taught himself how to code so that he could use Twilio in his act. And I think AI is like reducing the barrier to entry so much that I think there's going to be so much opportunity for folks who like maybe don't necessarily identify as a developer, but they identify as a blank who can write code. And if you are a nurse and you know how to write any code, you're a magician, like right. And my buddy Doug, he is truly a magician, but because he knows how to write code, he can blow away his friends who know everything about magic, but they know nothing about code. And they cannot fathom how he made their phone ring, right? And so I think there's so much great opportunity thinking about your career in that way is like, what is the Venn diagram of like the two or three things that you uniquely can get good at, like kind of get pretty good at two or three different things. And there's very, very few other people in the world who are good at those two or three different things.
Love it. The most naive part of today was thinking that I could keep us to like 35 minutes.
Sorry about that.
Uh,
That was my fault.
no, I mean, I appreciate it. I am gonna open these breakout rooms. They're like opt into the appropriate space for you. I wrote a couple questions while we were talking that I pasted into the chat, and would love for you to just jump in there, check in with your peers for a couple minutes, and then obviously as you transition to lunch and so forth, get it. Thanks so much, Greg, for joining us today, and thanks everybody for listening in, putting some questions in the chat, and hope you have a good conversation with your cohort.
It was really nice meeting you all.
Get out of here, people. Greg, you can stay.
You got it.
Everybody else has a room, you know. It is so interesting, you know, as a parent, as a teacher, etc. Like I definitely get it where people hit anxious places about AI. And it's like,
Yeah.
what if these superpowers are too much?
Yeah.
You know, I love that your daughter is like co-piloting her writing.
Yeah. Well, but I mean, the flip side though, we've had times when she had a play date coming up and she's like, no, I don't, I'm good. I'm just chatting with Chat GPT right now. We're like, no, I'm like, we have to prioritize our human friends. The Chat GPT will never challenge her. It will never criticize her. It will always give her its full attention.
Mm.
These things are designed to be affable and to basically like always kind of agree and agreeable. Like they always want to agree with you. They affirm you. They validate you. Like why would you want to go talk to a human if you got that? So yeah, I do think there's going to be challenges. And it's definitely a brand new thing. And my thing is just like she uses ChatGPT and Claude, but she uses my account. So I'm just always looking at the chat history. And
I didn't think
also,
anything about that. The whole new levels, man, the like surveillance state of modern parenting,
yeah.
it is fucking hard to figure out where to draw those lines.
Yeah, and she's only 10, so it's a little bit easier to like justify like I'm just going to look at everything. But the way I described it to her last year when we got her a laptop was like, hey, you know how we hold your sister's hand while we cross the street? And we're like, yeah. She's like, why? I'm like, why do we do that? She's like, so she doesn't get hit by a bus. We're like, yeah. I'm like, it's sad, but there's actually more young women who get killed because of stuff happens on the internet than get hit by buses in Brooklyn, through social media and suicide and depression and stuff. And I'm like, so as you go out onto the internet, we are going to hold your hand, and we are going to do that for quite a while until we are confident that you know how to like look both ways and avoid the dangers that are out there. And that might be a long time. I don't know. But the internet is almost certainly a bigger danger to young women than it is than traffic in Brooklyn is.
I mean, I think that's like an amazing metaphor and explanation for. Sounds like y'all doing some good parenting over there. You know,
We'll see.
I've been solo parenting now for 2 years, maybe 3 years, and it's interesting having the opportunity to reboot parenting into like doing it the way you want to do it, not doing it in any degree of compromise,
Yeah.
and also having your whatever your blind spots or whatever your gaps are. It's like you're the only one now. So
Wow.
yeah, it's an interesting adventure. And I think particularly my oldest is 15 now,
Wow.
and she's had a tough time with school, but it is, on these questions around like where do you draw lines and so forth, like her online medical records I can't see anymore. Like when
Oh,
she turned
interesting.
14, they like turned my access off.
Oh, wow.
And it's just kind of like, really? Like, but I still have to pay the bill, right? And they're like,
Right.
correct, and it's and it the like transition of responsibility to kids, I think, is so interesting in this time where in some ways childhood is like perpetuated, and 20, 25, 30 year olds are in some ways acting like teenagers of
Yeah.
50 years ago.
Yeah.
And in some ways it's like you're 10, you're 11. Yeah, like my youngest, he's very into VR games now.
Yeah.
And so he's like, I can hear him because the speakers are kind of loud, right? I can hear him chatting with these kids, and it's like he's talking to some kid in England, and it's like that's amazing that they just met, they're playing the
Yeah.
game, and it's also like it is a kid in England, right?
Yeah. Right.
Like it's
Right.
not some fucking creeper doing X, Y, and Z. Like, oh,
It's all
it's an
weird.
amazing time. It's an amazing time. So we're gonna
It,
put these Iron Man suits on and try not to
right.
blast each other with it.
Totally. Yeah, totally. I don't think there's any other time in history I'd rather be alive, but it is, the stuff's changing very, very fast. Just on the AI stuff, right? Like, and I do wonder, 10 years from now, I'm going to look back and be like, oh my God, I can't believe, just like how social media crept up on us. And I think we all kind of like agree that it's probably a net negative for mental health stuff and whatnot, even if there's positive, be interesting just to see what we all think about AI in 10 or 20 years. And I could see it go like, I think maybe Instagram's not good for her, but the internet I think has been a net win for society in a very big way, so it'll just be interesting to see how it all plays out. All right,
Yeah.
I have another call
Oh
here I
yeah,
got to
go.
run to,
Sorry.
but no, no, no,
Get out of
that's
here.
great, dude. Thank you so much for the invite. This was fun.
Yeah, thanks for coming, and good luck, and let's stay in better touch. Oh,
Sounds
they
great,
want to
man.
know if they can follow up with you. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'll drop my email in the chat here, or they
okay,
can find me on the internet. Let me drop my email there.
cool.
Cool. All
All right,
right,
man.
man. It
Talk
was
to you
great to
soon.
see you.
Bye.
Thanks for reaching out. See ya.